Happy Monday. How's it going?
Happy Monday, Joe. Welcome, Andreas.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy Monday.
Where are you located
Happy
right
Monday.
now? You want to tell the audience?
Sure. So right now I'm in the very south of Germany, near Austria and Switzerland. It's pretty scenic out there if I get outside, so you can actually see the Alps.
That sounds pretty stunning. So,
Oh,
but you're saying it's like really stupidly hot there right now, and you don't have AC.
it is exactly. I would say it's about 30, 35 degrees Celsius, so mid 90s. Yeah, Germany doesn't have air conditioning in a lot of places, so it's a little toasty, but it's all right.
Well, we'll do our best to not get you too overheated in the discussion here. So,
Well,
sorry about that. Yeah.
I'm sure with you it'll be a cool conversation, anyways.
Oh yes, no pun intended.
Yeah.
For people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. So, hey, my name is Andreas Welsch. If you are on LinkedIn, you probably see me as the Chief AI Strategist of Intelligence Briefing, where I share my own experience in learning how we can run AI in business successfully. That's it. That's
That's
the
it.
pitch.
No, that's podcast. All right. So, yeah, and we're here to actually talk about should your business chase generative AI? So, I think for the audience out there, first, what is generative AI? If you can level
Sure.
set on
Look,
that.
yeah. So, look, I think if we look at how we've dealt with data and made sense of it, there are probably three main eras. Roughly whatever 70s to maybe the early 2010s, where we had statistical modeling to make predictions about patterns that you've seen in the data, to do forecasting, these kind of things. Then fast forward in 2010s, mid 2010, machine learning was the big thing and the hype, where you've been able to predict more information. And now with generative AI, we're actually able for the first time to create information and to recreate information, and to do that in a number of different types of media. So it could be text, it could be images, audio, video, all together use one medium to create something in another. And that just opens up so many more possibilities than just predicting, for example, what's my sales forecast going to be next quarter or 3 quarters out.
It's funny because to me, generative AI has actually been around for a while. Like GANs were a big thing about, what was it, 5 years ago?
Yeah.
What's different this time? I mean, I know one thing that's different is that large language models and ChatGPT have really captured the public imagination. But what else is different this time?
I think that's really one key piece, right? We've been obviously talking about machine learning and deep learning for a number of years, and like I said, we've seen it climb the hype cycle. We got into the trial of disillusionment at the end of last year, and media and analysts were talking up the next AI winter, and then all of a sudden this thing called ChatGPT comes along, and anybody can all of a sudden interact with AI and get a feeling for it, and also get a benefit from it, right? So to me, that's a big thing. Whether you call it democratization or just ease of access, to me, that's the biggest thing that everybody can see and feel it. They can see it on their own device. It's no longer something that is this abstract concept, that technology that only a few people with a very specialized skill set can run on highly expensive machines or workloads. So to me, it's really the part about access and accessibility.
But hasn't that been the case for a while? Like companies have been pitching the idea of like citizen data scientists, for example, and making machine learning easy to use. I mean, that's been a trend for at least the last 10 years, right? So what?
Yeah. So I think it moves it very, very close to the end user this time. Right? It's something that you and I can try out. With all the 10x your productivity posts on social media, right? There's an abundance of ways and tools that you can try out and use this technology in a way that is helpful for you, right? Whether it's, say, for your podcast, if you create a transcript from it and you translate your audio into written language, or you then add captions again, or you cut out certain pieces from your audio or video, and it still sounds as if it's a seamless conversation if you remove some of the filler words or these kind of things. So again, to me, it moves the technology a lot closer to me as an end user, and that makes it a lot easier to use and to understand as well. And that's really the difference, in my opinion.
How does this technology change things for product managers specifically? Because to me, it seems like it opens up a whole new set of possibilities and problems when you're managing product. And so in the past, product was focused on like UX, but also a lot on code and working with your coding team. I assume people are mapping this out already, but what are your thoughts?
I think it changes the game in very significant ways. Before, if you were doing probabilistic machine learning type scenarios, you had to get data. You had to get enough data. It had to be clean enough. You had to understand it. You had to work with your business stakeholders, figure out what are the features we want to engineer, what are the types of information we want to get out of it or that we want to predict. In my opinion, now with foundation models, at least if you're doing primarily prompting, you have access to a lot of the text-based information and being able to predict what's that next word in that sentence or sequence. So in a way that reduces the need for a lot of the data. It doesn't mean that you no longer need data, because if any of you have used ChatGPT before, and I'm assuming you have in the audience, if you wanted to create, for example, a job description and say, write me a job description for a Python developer. It's okay, right? It does the job, but it's pretty generic. But you need additional data to enrich that job description to make it specific to your business, for example. How many years of experience? What type of projects? What type of industry should this person have worked on in that you're looking for? So you still need some kind of data, again, even if you're just doing prompting, to make it very specific and very tailored and to get to those tailored outcomes. Now, I think from there on, there are new complexities that are introduced. And to me, that's around the LLM ops and the operations of these models. That would actually love to get your perspective on this as well, both Matt and Joe, as well as the audience. Because I'm thinking from my own experience, moving from ChatGPT 3 or 3.5 to 4, when they made that available, all of a sudden I felt my prompts were no longer working. And I've used them for
interesting
months before, but I didn't get the same output. So I'm also wondering what you are seeing in the community as you're changing from one model version to the next. What is that change that you're introducing that you again need to test for, even if you're trying to use the same prompt? Just as one aspect where I feel it changes the game for product.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I noticed even that GPT-4 being in beta, even that would change over time. I'd feed in the same prompt, and then something that had worked a week ago would stop working. And in some cases, it seemed like they maybe had trained it to block certain things. Not that I was trying to jailbreak it, but like block certain languages from working that they hadn't fully vetted. Go ahead, Joe. You had some things to add.
No, I'm exactly the same thing. I even noticed you can always test out GPT 3.5 and 4 against Bard, for example, right? That's pretty standard, and it is very interesting because the same prompt will yield just vastly different results. And yeah, I've noticed prompt degradation too in 4. So it's I don't know what's up with that. So I mean, you're dealing with a stochastic machine, so
right.
It's anything's possible.
Right. So what I'm wondering, for example, is say if you use a regular API, right? The parameters are defined. Your vendor will tell you if there's any deprecation or any changes with the next API, and the parameters are pretty fixed. But if you're with large language models, for example, it's the prompt that gets you the output. So if something changes in that black box without you knowing, or without you knowing what the influence is, that might create another risk. And I mean, then just to continue answering your question, Matt, for product teams, I think especially around things of bias or factual inaccuracies, or call them hallucinations, how do you test for that? How do you guard against that? And what is the recommendation that you give to your end users? Right? And we've seen that in some consumer-facing apps where, for example, one of the email clients, there's a message or a notification that says, hey, the summary has been created with generative AI. You should check if it is factually accurate, if this prioritizes the right things. But it's a helpful feature, but you are in charge to make sure that you use it correctly, or there might be some inaccuracies in this. And I think Bard has a similar disclaimer as well in ChatGPT does too. So I think that's interesting in a way to use these innovations in new technologies, but add a disclaimer and saying not only use at your own risk, but you should know that there are some limitations to it. So go check for them. Don't take that at face value.
But the limitations are interesting because they're not guardrails in the traditional sense. Like you don't know the boundary until you get the answer, and you're like, okay, that either makes sense or it doesn't make sense, or it's a good answer or it's a pretty crap answer, right? So it's interesting because it keeps shifting. It's like a shapeshifter. So I don't know. It's interesting, but then I see the same thing with images as well, right? So Midjourney, for example, is pretty decent, but depending on the prompt, you might get some very interesting results. And so it's fascinating across the board, but I guess, there are a couple of questions in the audience, which we'll get to in a second, but I guess back to the central question of the talk or this episode, which is should your business chase generative AI? So we already talked about what generative AI is and some of the issues with it. But if you have a business, should you chase it?
I would say you shouldn't chase it, but you should carefully evaluate whether it adds value to your business. So chasing to me means it's in the media, there's fear of missing out, everybody's doing it, you're seeing all these great tools, and your competitors supposedly are using this stuff. So holy crap, we need to do something too, right? That to me is chasing. That creates a risk of pursuing something without an immediate need or without a goal in mind, without a vision. If on the other hand, you have identified certain issues or problems that you haven't been able to address before, do an evaluation if generative AI could be the technology that helps you do that, whether it's scaling your web copy or your blog posts or your product descriptions and have those generated with AI, for example, or summarize your meeting minutes from your sales calls and so on, right? Doing it use case specific and maybe pilot it before you roll it out more broadly or before you pursue the next and the next and the next use case would be my recommendation. So in that sense, I feel not too much has actually changed from our previous machine learning hype in how you should approach it. So the same things are true, right? Do you have a business problem that you want to solve? Can you describe it? And is this the right technology to do it? Or is there something else? That would be my short summary.
And I might add on top of that, the whole situation now reminds me of every craze we've seen in the past, right? So the data science craze, the real-time craze, all these hype cycles. And in each case, typically, instead of trying to find a really sophisticated use case, you actually want to find the easiest use case possible and then really have a product mindset about it. So just find something super simple. Like if I have some kind of a dashboarding application, then maybe I can use generative AI to generate SQL queries, but also have the users check them and see if they make any sense and then feed the data back in. But if I try to make my use case like, let's replace all of our workers, that might not be a good use case for generative AI.
No.
It's too
well,
general.
I've even heard people say they're going to replace all their databases with large language models.
Right.
That was the craziest thing I'd heard in a while. So it's like, I don't think you understand how technology works, but that's cool. So
yeah, but look, to your point, I think it's more about augmentation still. And I saw OpenAI released code interpreter at the end of last week or over the weekend. So having something that can analyze data, that can give you recommendations, that they can summarize what it is seeing. I think there are a lot of opportunities there also, again, for productivity and enhancements. And that's where I see most of the use cases at the moment be. These low-hanging fruit, quick wins, no-brainers, whatever you want to call them. But the things that are so obvious that people either build a product around them or that they want to implement them because it addresses a very specific problem and a very specific need.
yeah, there's definitely kind of frontline innovations are good. Like, if you look at your iPhone though, right? I mean, it's had ML for ages. Right, but it was so sneaky under the hood, you didn't notice it. But your camera is fantastic on this, an iPhone 14 Pro, and it's like kills it. Good camera, right? But a lot of that's because of machine learning. And I think in much the same way, a lot of the wins are going to be the ones that are, like you say, are easy. You probably won't even notice them, frankly. They'll just run in the background, but it's like it'll make you more productive that way. It's not some groundbreaking thing where we have like robots in your office and running everything. That would be kind of weird and cool too. But I think a lot of the innovation is going to be the stuff you don't notice actually.
I agree.
But you suddenly notice because you're going faster, right?
Yeah, but I think that's an important point as well. To what degree does an end user need to know that there is AI in there? I think there's certainly some aspects where it's important when it's about having a human in the loop to check or double check the output that has been generated. But even before generative AI, right? If this makes your camera better, do you need to know that this is based on AI? Probably only if your company wants to advertise it or has motivations to say, hey, we're innovative, we're using AI and so on. But to the end user, hey, can I take better photos? Sure. All right, I'll go with this product over the other.
I think any domain where there's risk, you probably have to inform the user. So for example, all of these models are probabilistic, which means that you can get very random results, including hallucination, including all kinds of horrible stuff coming out of the model if it happens to sneak by the training. Or with things like Midjourney, you can just get really weird, maybe disturbing images out of it. And so you kind of have to let the users know, like, hey, we don't always know what this is going to produce. You may need to regenerate if it doesn't come out right. Or you may need to let us know if there's a problem with the output.
That's a good point, though.
What are some of the business cases, though? I mean, some of the big wins you see companies could make. Can you fit those into like generic buckets right now, or is it maybe too soon?
Sure. So, I mean, if you look at the main buckets, it's where's a lot of time spent creating information. So I think sales and marketing are two obvious ones, whether it's creating product descriptions or more personalized, tailored product descriptions, all the way to iterating faster over text or copy that you put on the web that is more tailored to your audience. Blog posts, all the like, right? We see it on social media as well, whether it's Gen AI created posts or now even comments, which to me kind of takes away from the purpose of having a social network, but that's a different conversation. Right. So all the way then to sales, like you mentioned, summarizing sales calls, drafting sales emails, and so on. And I think it's a fine line between efficiency and personalization. If you sound like anybody, it's your off the middle generic email, then where's that personal connection? And I as a customer, do I feel valued if I get that generic? Hey, I'm Joe. I can help you solve all your problems. Here's my product. Should we schedule?
I actually say that all the time anyway, so it's fine.
You do that, right? Yeah, but I think it's more credible with you. So. That's one big area, but I think there are also others when you look at things like synthetic data and being able to create enough data and to create enough training data, yet without having to have real world data that includes maybe personal identifiable information, which is always a tricky situation, right? So if you can generate that information and the person doesn't even exist, but it serves your same purpose, you have the same distribution of data, you can build your model on it, that could really accelerate things as well. And it's not a chat-based use case, right? like the ones that we typically interact with. So I think there are some non-obvious things as well, where large language models can help you behind the scenes too.
Let me ask you a very open-ended follow-on question with regard to private data. What are your thoughts on the debate and the policy questions about private data? So for example, if I type a prompt into ChatGPT, that data can be used to retrain the model, and typically is. OpenAI warns you to be careful about what you put in there, but people are going to put all kinds of things in. That's just the reality. So what are your thoughts? How do we address these issues?
So I think that's a very important and a very serious topic. I haven't seen a good solution for it, to be honest. And I'm sure information security folks must be going crazy. Right? Yes, it's a consumer app. Even it's a free research preview, and you're not supposed to put data in there. But we've already seen the stories in the news and the headlines that people are doing it. Whether it's lack of knowledge or just looking for more efficiency. But be that as it may. So I think it's a pretty touchy subject. Right? On one hand, you do want to get the benefits, but on the other hand, do you really understand what is happening with your data, what you're giving somebody else, or what you're giving up in that sense? And information security is certainly one, but to what extent do we understand that this might actually improve the model, and is that something that we want to do? I mean, certainly, yes, we would want to have better performing models, but with what kind of data? Probably not with my proprietary company data. With getting an itinerary for a 3-day trip to Paris, yeah, maybe, right? But even there, is that something that I, as a private citizen and individual, do want to give up? So I think we'll likely see more advancements in that space to control it more, and have better controls in place overall, which I think would need to happen likely at the prompt level before you submit anything, right? To say, is it something that I would want to send to a provider, or that I would want to send to a model? But I think some of the providers also allow you to just use the models for inference and not store any data that you submit, which can help in a lot of the enterprise use cases as well.
Mm-hmm. Actually, got a couple questions here from Eugene. First question, could you talk about limits of use? By now, we all know about the New York federal attorney who used AI to research case law and used 2 cases that ChatGPT made up, and he is now in the process of being disbarred. I don't know if that's a question, but the what are your thoughts on this, I guess?
So to me, that goes back to the point that I made earlier, right? Do people actually know how this stuff works under the hood, and what they're dealing with, right? It's very consumer friendly to use many of these applications, but the fact that it's different from a search engine, that it in many cases either doesn't give you the citations or it makes them up, depending on the tool you use. I know others are solving for that differently, like Bing and Bard. But then also the fact around hallucinations. So if you have some knowledge of the subject that you're trying to learn more about, or that you're trying to research, that's a much better position to be in than to totally rely on something like a generative AI app or something like ChatGPT to teach you about it. Right? We've seen this in the case here with the attorney in New York, that believed that the output that ChatGPT created for it was valid and was sound and did exist, until they found out that actually it didn't, and it just made it up. So these factual inaccuracies, hallucinations, things that sound plausible but are factually incorrect, I think that's a risk, and there's a lot more education needed and awareness that we need to create. So it goes back to more of the digital literacy, AI literacy, to at least have a foundational understanding of what is that technology, what does it do. But it's easier to do that for people in tech and with people in tech than outside of tech. But that's the big responsibility for us as well, I think.
Kind of a follow-on from Eugene too, about using ChatGPT to generate resumes. So ChatGPT is caught making up things about resumes. I don't know. How do you deal with this? What are your thoughts on this?
That's a good question. I have not seen anybody use ChatGPT to create resumes. I know it's possible. There again, I would say you know your resume best, and what you've worked in, and what you've led and done. So do your due diligence. But I think it gets into an interesting area already before ChatGPT, right? Using AI to compare the fit of candidates to a job description, or the similarity of their skills to what you have in the job description. And even before that, with ATS application, applicant tracking systems.
Yeah.
And you get into this question of, are people trying to game the algorithm? So if I know that there's likely an AI behind, should I include certain keywords in my resume so I have a higher probability of making it through the algorithmic screening? And on the other hand, then what does it mean for people that are not aware that there's an AI behind that might or might not react to certain keywords in certain ways? So does it put them at a disadvantage? I think there's a whole debate and a whole space there to look at that, and whether that is something you should do, or something that's ethical, something that is ethical for you as a person creating your resume, to try to sneak by the AI and get through that first screening. But I think there are a lot of more questions to be answered in that area.
What are your thoughts on this, Matt?
So this is interesting. The one with the attorneys in particular, I think part of this just comes down to a question of human responsibility. Part of the reason they're being sanctioned is not just because they asked ChatGPT a question, got a response, did not check it, and submitted it to the court. But on top of that, when they were aware that this had happened, when they were aware that the citations were incorrect, they didn't inform the court that that was the case and say, hey, we screwed up. That's a big one. That's basic professional responsibility, right? Like you're required, if you become aware that there's a problem in testimony, a problem in a submission, you're required by the court to submit that and say, hey, we screwed up, we got to fix this. And so there's kind of a double problem here. And I think a lot of these ethical questions with AI come down to that. It's still issues of human responsibility, right? Of checking your work and making sure that what you submit is correct and then taking responsibility when things go wrong. It's interesting because I feel like the issues of hallucination were so much in the news that I don't know how you could not be aware of that. On the other hand, we're in the tech industry, so maybe that's a little unfair.
Yeah, I might be surprised.
But certainly these attorneys became aware of the problem after their submission and then didn't go and fix it. And so that's part of the reason they're in serious trouble here.
So. I think they deserve what they get for that. So, as far as resumes go, though, I mean, that's an interesting one, right? But I think to your point, people game whatever they're supposed to game. So,
But take a look at Crispin's comment. He said, I created a resume for my LinkedIn profile just to see what would happen. And apparently I have 20 patents and went to Harvard in IT for my master's degree.
Right? So, congratulations. That's a lot of accomplishments, Crispin.
Joe and I tried this too and made up a bunch of stuff. Apparently, did I work at Airbnb or something, Joe?
Yeah, you're a senior data scientist at Airbnb. I was a data engineer at Google, right? We don't work at those companies, obviously, but we asked about ourselves because we're really vain and narcissistic. So I had Bill Inman, actually. I had Bill Inman check a Bard and ChatGPT, and it made up a bunch of stuff about him too. And he's well known, right? I sent it to him. He's like, yeah, this is like completely bogus. So,
but a point about this, a couple of weeks ago, I was on a panel, and one of the other panelists was Brian Calo, professor from the University of Washington. And that was right around the time that we had the Senate hearings in the US with Gary Marcus testifying in front of the Senate about AI and the risk of AI and several others. So Brian was sharing that apparently some news site had used generative AI to create an article, and that mentioned that apparently he was speaking in front of in front of the Senate, which was factually inaccurate. It was Gary Marcus. So now he said, hey, there's this digital record that exists on the internet that apparently I have spoken in front of in front of the Senate, and there's no way to rectify it or to correct it. So then that creates a different problem with large language models in a sense, because if articles like that or multiple of these articles become your training data again, doesn't that dilute the training set that you're creating and the accuracy of the training set? So I think in that sense, there are different problems that we're seeing, that we're likely seeing more of. I think just a couple of weeks ago, there was an interesting paper about what they called model collapse, as generations of large language models trained on generated text use that for training, that things become a lot more uniform and abstract and lose the nuance, the detail, and to some extent also the truth and factualness behind them.
Interesting. Well, congratulations. It's quite an accomplishment too, Andreas. Yeah, it is. It's fascinating. It's and I think for businesses too, to kind of bring it back to businesses, it's interesting because I think a lot of companies want to sit these large language models on top of their databases. But anyone who's seen these databases, for the most part, corporate databases are a hellscape. There's no way of sugarcoating it. So, I mean, you can barely put BI on top of this stuff. So I'm very curious how large language models are going to rectify the situation and make it better. So,
I think that's a mix of things again, right? One would be how far can you get with prompt engineering and using your vanilla model? The other one, to your point, is how good is my data? And I think that mileage will vary by individual business and use case.
Do you think that generative AI could just circumvent data quality and all those things?
I think there's a lot of optimism in that question.
Oh,
but I know there's actually realism behind it. So I think it's still garbage in, garbage out. It's just faster, right? It's just faster garbage.
Yeah, that
Faster
makes sense.
garbage. I like that.
Yeah. What do you think? So the question of AI and copyright has been in the news a lot lately. And so, for example, the comedian Sarah Silverman is suing, I believe, OpenAI and some other companies
And Meta,
for training on her books specifically. And then there's a second copyright question. So there's the training copyright question, and then there's the output plagiarism question. So in some cases, these models can memorize things and then just spit out verbatim something that they copied somewhere else. What are your thoughts on those two copyright questions right now?
So I think it was interesting at the end of last year when things like DALL-E 2, Midjourney had been out for a couple of months, and we were starting to see ChatGPT emerge, and people were saying, oh, creatives are so concerned about this, and doesn't it actually help them? But I think if you are in a creative profession and that is what you make your or that is your bread and butter and what you make your money with, it's a totally different perspective, right? Here's something that I have created, that I have put skill and talent into and invested time. That's a product of my work, and there's somebody that uses it, doesn't give attribution or pays royalties, and instead makes money of that. So I can very well empathize with people in the creative space and these debates. What I've seen is specifically around images, which I think is a pretty smart move, are Adobe and Shutterstock saying we give you the ability to create your images as well with generative AI, but we've trained it limited to our data set that we have licensed and then we have rights to. As far as I understand, and I might not be fully current on that issue, but what is still missing is, are there any royalties that are paid back to the individual artists, or is that covered under the royalties that they have already received? But at least from a user perspective, if you're using these images, it's a lot easier for the likes of Adobe and Shutterstock to say you're actually legally safe if you use our products because it's only been trained on copyrighted material that we have a license for. Doesn't solve the question of what is actually happening with the artists or what are remuneration models going to be in the future. Maybe there are different ones as well than what it currently looks like.
I think the Sarah Silverman data was got off of BitTorrent or something too. So, or some
really that part.
Yeah,
I hadn't seen that detail.
It wasn't a standard public data set, right? So that's the other issue, is that you're using these uncurated sets or sort of secondhand sets for your training. So it's kind of a problem. But I know for Matt and I, right, like we get royalties off our book.
Yeah.
Over there. And you should go buy it if you haven't, so Matt and I can get more royalties.
What's the name?
We don't get
What's the name of that again, the book?
Fundamentals of Data Engineering. It's the O'Reilly book. So yeah, O'Reilly.com or go to Amazon. We're shilling for ourselves.
Shilling for it's our GoFundMe. But I know we don't get royalties from OpenAI and Meta, right? That's just how it is. And I don't know any content creators who are right now. I mean, hopefully it changes, because I think as a content creator, it's interesting because I feel like on one hand, it actually makes things easier in some ways for content creators because you can stand out better. Obviously, writing's easier because you can just have AI write it. But I try not to do that, actually. I think it's not cheating necessarily, but I do think it doesn't give you the voice and the story arc you're trying to get to, right? And so I think for purely creative work, I think it's actually next to useless. But it is interesting because I feel like, okay, so I put this book out and then it's just going to get, sucked up into this large language model. So, part of it is like the incentive. Like what incentive does a creator have? You can start paywalling all your stuff. I mean, a lot of my new stuff is going to go on Substack, right? And similar stuff where it's behind a paywall and at least guarded. So, you can't publicly get to the data unless you pay for it, right? But the internet is the internet. The commonality is like, everything's free at some point. Everything is available. Doesn't matter what it is. Everything gets leaked and then it's sucked into the giant vacuum. So that's just the reality of it. So it's a tension that I'm thinking about right now. I don't know about you, Matt, as a content creator as well. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think the funny thing is that we actually kind of have solutions to a lot of these problems already in the human domain. In other words, right now, if I say I've memorized a long passage of text. I know as a human that I am accountable for citing that text if I use it, and that I can't pass it off as my own work, and that I might get caught if I do so. Obviously, large language models don't think at that kind of meta level, but I think at some point, these companies that produce large language models that allow people to use them will have an accountability for checking the output for copyright and then blocking output that's copyrighted, basically. Just like the human brain does similar things, right? There's this notion where you have speech centers and you have executive functions that kind of check things that you're saying. They keep you from saying really terrible things. There are examples of people with brain damage and different types of executive functions who then say really terrible things. And I think we're kind of at the same stage with AI where we have to add some of these other functions that humans have built in.
But to Joe's point about using it for content creation, that's
Yes.
where I'm wondering where's the authenticity, right? To me, right now, so I use ChatGPT to create show notes and to create summaries of my podcast, because I feel the information is already there. Somebody has already said it. It's clear. It's not my own thoughts and information. And if I can summarize it more quickly than writing it myself, perfect, right? But if it's a thought piece that I'm writing and it's something that I'm thinking through and I'm checking my line of argument and does it make sense, I actually want to do it myself because I feel it's a lot more authentic. And I assume as a reader you would expect that somebody puts in the thought themselves and not just in the prompt.
Mm-hmm. And you can tell when somebody uses ChatGPT to write these days. I've seen some books people have published recently in the tech space, and I'm like, you use ChatGPT to write this. It's not your voice. I know you. So
yeah,
you can tell. And it's a big mark too. Yeah. To me, it's a sign of laziness.
Yeah. So what does it do then again to your brand and how you actually want to be perceived versus how you are being perceived if people notice?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's interesting too, because you can use it as like a first pass, like a draft, say, hey, write me this thing, and then try to go back and edit it into your voice. But I found that it's so much work to try to edit it that you might as well just write it yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes it's good for generating ideas. So for example, if you get to a point in a piece and you're just like, where am I going to take this next? You can feed what you have in and let it continue. And I typically won't use that output per se, but there might be some good ideas in there that I can use. Which is kind of similar to having a human conversation, right? Like when you're working on ideas or a piece of some sort, just like when we wrote the book, Joe, you have a lot of these conversations and bounce ideas off of people, and then you develop more ideas in the process.
It's weird how that works. I know. So that's interesting. Yeah, I guess it remains to be seen too. I think we're in early days here. I think every company is chomping at the bit to get involved in generative AI in some form or another. I'm very curious to see kind of a year out and what happens. What are your thoughts maybe a year out? How do you think this shapes out?
So first of all, I'm super excited about the hype, and not for the hype's sake, right? But for what it enables. And I think it enables two major things. One is everybody's talking about it. That means everybody's also somewhat learning some things about AI as a domain, right? Maybe not everybody goes below the surface, but there's enough information out there for you to learn a little bit more about AI than they would have before. And I think the second part is it also brings AI again back on a C-level agenda. And we are starting to have these conversations again of what are we doing with AI, right? And it shouldn't be what are we doing with AI? I think that's the wrong approach, but at least that you are able to have this conversation and that it is a matter of conversation again for executives and leaders to look at this makes me very, very optimistic. I've been in this space for a number of years and have seen that last hype cycle where we're super excited about all the things we could do, and we'd have flying cars and they pick us up in the morning and drive us to work, and it hasn't quite worked out yet. But here we are again. But I feel we're in a better place and in a better shape to have these conversations, and especially if we apply the learnings from last time around. I'm very, very hopeful. Where will be in 12 months? I think that's a very good question.
How about 12 days?
12 days. Three more doomsday news. Three more how it reshapes your business op-eds, and still struggling to make sense out of all the flood of information. That's, I think, where we'll be in 12 days. So you never really know what's happening, right? If you check the news in the morning, like, yeah, all right, looks like an average day in AI land, and you check again at 5 p.m. It's like, oh, here are all the things that I missed. Holy moly, right? So you never really know. But the thing is definitely that the space moves so extremely fast that there are also a lot of opportunities being created that we're not even aware of, and that we cannot even conceive today. And again, that makes me very hopeful.
And I'll add that we'll see at least 10 more lawsuits in the next 12 days over OpenAI and other technologies.
The legal team must be huge at this point.
They're augmenting it with ChatGPT, I'm sure.
That's a good point. Yeah, Law GPT. Yeah. Kind of switching gears a bit. So you do a podcast. Tell us about that. It's not too often we get to interview podcasters, so I'm very curious your approach and why do you do it, all that kind of stuff. So
sure. So about 18 months ago, I started doing a live stream myself as well. It's called What's the Buzz? That's where this props, I'm using a fake background. You get the idea where it is from, and that I usually use. So with What's the Buzz, it started as a live stream. I've started turning it into a podcast at the beginning of the year to reach a broader audience, and especially an audience that's not always live on Tuesdays at noon Eastern. And with What's the Buzz, I want to help AI leaders and those that want to become an AI leader to learn how they can apply AI in their business successfully, how they can run projects, how they can run programs of AI, how they can work with their stakeholders, define their AI strategy. Because a lot of times I feel we're either super tech or super business, and that the cross section and that dialogue is what we actually need to make sure that whatever we need and what we develop matches in the middle. So that's what I see my mission as, bringing tech and business together to make sure that what we build delivers business value. And I've seen that in previous roles that I've had in corporate, that it's not that trivial, right? It's not always just a tech problem, and it's not always just a business problem. And to your point, data is messy and sometimes even hard to get to in the first place. So how can we make that easier? So I invite hands-on practitioners and leaders to join the podcast. It's usually about 25 minutes per episode, so we can keep it relatively short. 3 questions. What's the issue? Why is it important? How have you addressed it in the past? And share a bit about their learnings. And my take on it is, there's so much art of the possible discussions and so much influencer and discussions that it's that I want to see a different example with the podcast, if you will, that it's people like you and I that are doing this day in, day out, that you can relate to, and that you can also hear how they are doing it, right? And what are the real issues that they have faced and how they've overcome. So thank you for letting me put that little plug in here. But go check it out.
Anytime.
Intelligence-briefing.com/livestream.
It is interesting, though. I think doing a podcast, like getting guests, is an art. So for the audience, we're doing some inside baseball, but it might be interesting for you. Who knows? Yeah. How do you go about sourcing your guests for your show?
Sure. For me, it's mainly folks in my audience that I engage with, or that have engaged with my content on LinkedIn, and not just once or twice, but over a couple of weeks or a couple of months even, where I think that there's an interesting perspective that the potential guest brings to the table. So, for example, at the end of August, I'll have Eric Fraser on. He's an executive at a company that specializes in culture change consulting. And he's been in the tech space for a long time. He's been commenting on my post for about the last year or so. And just the other week, he said, "Hey, he had a post or an article out there where he said, "Hey, I'm trying to see how much I can use generative AI for in my business." And how much of my role I can actually automate with AI. So that's a super exciting topic, because, right, it's either, hey, AI is going to kill us all, or it'll solve all our problems. So here's somebody that actually says, yeah, it's going to solve my problems. I want to see how much. Yes, right. So for somebody to say, I want to try this out and see how much of my role I can actually automate, and then see what else I move on to, then that's super interesting. For others, it's been conversations of, hey, I've seen you've been in an AI leadership role before. What has your experience been like? And we share some commonalities. So, how do you build stakeholder trust? How you get buy-in from your stakeholders? How have you faced that in your role, and how did you go about it? Because everybody else in a similar role or wanting to move into that role will run into the same issue or questions as well. So it really depends. But it's funny because I'm sure you're seeing that as well. And I didn't know that before I started the podcast, was that you have people reaching out to you and saying, hey, I have this great guest for you, and I really like your show, and you should consider them. And you're looking at, no, it's not a fit. I don't even know that person, right? So for me, it's really based on relationship and knowing the person that I want to invite, so we can have a very casual conversation.
Yeah,
We agree.
mean, there's this whole promotion sphere that's really developed in the last 20 years, like promotional content and such. And some of the promotional content is really good. A lot of it kind of loses its voice because it is just there to show for some product or something. And there's a lot of that in the podcast sphere. I'm sure, Joe, you have a lot of thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, we don't make money on the show, for one. Right? We don't have sponsors. Nobody pays us. You can't pay us. We don't take money. So that I think is good. It's rare, right? But we want it that way, and so it's invite only, right? So it keeps it special though. If you start taking money for stuff, then it changes the nature of the show.
I agree. So for me, the same thing, right? It's free because I think that adds value, that adds the authenticity that I think is important, that we're looking for overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a question of like how much would be enough to make you change your mind. So, but I think that it's for us. I mean, we make money in other ways, right? So it's simply a way, I think, to have fun conversations. I mean, podcasting for me, I made a joke the other day that all my phone calls are now podcasts because I pretty much like put the kibosh on all meetings. So it's a lot of fun because I get to have conversations with interesting people. I'm sure Matt feels the same way. Yeah. It's like, when do we otherwise interact, right? So I mean, that's the beauty of it. And if people want to listen to it, that's cool too. I mean, I think if nobody was listening to it, we'd still do it because it's just interesting conversations.
That's how it started, right? We just started
that's true
conversations before we even had guests.
Yeah, it was like Wayne's World. Yeah,
it was like 2020 or something.
Yeah. It was pretty low budget.
Yeah, and I even like editing them, right? And cutting it down and creating shorter videos that you can then share it again or other show notes. Like I said, for me, that's a good way to force myself to have a use case for ChatGPT and try out different prompts and see how much I can cram into one and still get output and these kind of things, right? So it's it serves multiple purposes.
Yeah, for sure. So highlight some of the comments here. Yeah, Fred, no shilling or selling. That's the rule. Yep. Val says it's unbiased. So hang out here. Yep, exactly. Yeah. LinkedIn user, aka Jason Taylor. Yeah, we're not worthy. Yeah, all those things, right? I think it's cool to see creators like yourself doing what you're doing. I think it's inspiring, and it also, I think, reaffirms that we're also doing cool stuff too. So it's nice confirmation bias and filter bubbles and all that stuff. But it, right now it's really hard, I think, because there's a lot of noise out there in the data space. I think a lot of BS, to be frank. So,
I must say it feels like it was a lot easier last year to cut through.
Yeah.
Right. To your point, even things like hashtags AI or generative AI, they're so overloaded with carousel posts and PDFs of here are the next 10 tools that you should use. It's really hard to get good traction and get your message out, even if you're not selling anything, right? Or because you're not selling anything, if you will. I feel that's gotten definitely more challenging this year.
It's interesting though. My thought right now is that we're kind of moving into a post SEO era, and by that I don't mean that SEO will go away completely, but I mean that the people will look for credibility from voices as opposed to just doing a Google search and finding whatever comes up. The problem is that the Google search results are just flooded with promotional content, to your point, Andreas, the whole thing we've been talking about here. And so people are looking for more neutral voices to follow, and then they kind of leapfrog between content that from content to content that way based on recommendations, I think. Kind of the old way of doing things like mixtapes.
Well, I have a big prediction that in person is going to be a big thing.
Yeah.
In person, because you can't replicate it. You can't, You can't fake it with AI. I think in-person meetups and in-person everything is going to be actually more popular because you want authentic conversations with people in
So
real
think
life.
about
Look
that.
at the conferences.
Right?
What's
Think
that?
about that coming full circle, right? We're so excited about social media, so we can connect with people near and far, and maybe not have to be in the same room and get the same efficiency. We saw that, that only works so well, and now we're back to let's meet in person again. That's
It's the
awesome.
pendulums. That's awesome.
Well, it's a
Cool.
pendulum, and it's funny, Joe. I mean, so many of our connections over the last couple of years have come from social media, and then you actually meet people at conferences, which is just an incredible experience. And so it's an in-person experience that's enabled by social media in some sense, and so it's hopefully becoming there's a vicious cycle part. There's also a virtuous feedback loop that you get sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, cool. I got a jet right now because I got to wrangle my kids. It's summertime. But great chat. If you want to find out more about you, how can they do that?
Sure. So you can look me up on LinkedIn, Andreas Welsch. You can also go to my website, intelligence-briefing.com, where you find all information about the podcasts and my newsletter. Have I mentioned I have a newsletter on Substack? So check that out too. Like the podcast runs bi-weekly, usually on Tuesdays. So go check that out. Thanks for having me, by the way. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
thanks.
Thanks for joining.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, the audience. We'll see you later. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.